On today's Locked On Jayhawks, let's fix the Kansas basketball rotation.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening? Derek Johnson here. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making it your first listen every day, and thank you to the everyday listeners tuning in to the show. You make it what it is, so appreciate you for listening. On today's episode of Locked On Jayhawks, we're going to fix the KU basketball rotation. What do we think? Where should the minutes go? What would make this thing a little bit better, both without KJ and then once KJ is able to come back? And then a little bit of a question, what can we actually expect? Because there's a difference in, maybe what some of our opinions are and what is probably going to actually happen. So we'll get into all that on today's episode of the show, which is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets. If you win your first bet, just visit FanDuel.com to get started today. All right, so KJ Adams is going to be out for the TCU game, and it seems like to me he's probably going to be out for, maybe a few more games after that. At the very least, this is something that you're going to have at least one more game where that is the case. And I feel like pretty confident it'd be at least two. So with that said, what should the minute rotation look like, I think, moving forward? Because you look at the Kansas State game, and it was odd that Ryland Griffin only played 12 minutes, certainly, right? It would have been odd even if KJ Adams was playing, that Ryland Griffin only played 12 minutes. I know it's not like that far off from some of the games he's been playing where maybe he's played like 15 or 16, 18 minutes, right? But 12 seems low, especially when there's an extra almost 30 minutes to go around, 29 minutes to go around when KJ is not there. So that was certainly odd. How would this go around? Now, not every team you're going to play is going to utilize the same rotation if you're Kansas, and I get that, right? When you're playing Kansas State, they're playing more two big men, right? Coleman Hawkins, who's 6'10", who basically was the 5-man for Illinois a season ago, is playing the 4 for Kansas State, whereas some of the other teams you play are going to play more wing types at the 4 position. But then you go ahead to for instance, the Houston game on Saturday, and Houston, even though both their big men are like 6'8", both of them have like 7-foot plus wingspans, and they basically play like centers. So like that's more of a 2 big lineup, right? So dependent on who you are playing is going to factor in to what rotations you're playing and how well you are able to play them. So I understand that. This is just kind of an overarching like base standard for what it would be. So in terms of the games without KJ, while KJ is currently away, to me, when I'm looking at the minutes of how they would be allocated, I would be looking at, Dajuan Harris playing 30 minutes per night, Shakeel Moore giving you the backup point guard minutes for those 10 minutes behind him, and then continuing to start Dajuan next to Shaq Moore, next to Zeke Mayo, and then Shaq Moore gets another 16 minutes at the 2. So overall, Shaq Moore's playing 26 minutes. Now, I do think there is a little bit something of, hey, KJ's been, you could argue, your best defender on the team this season. And we just talked about it in the Kansas State game. You had your best offensive performance by points per possession, but you also had your worst defensive performance by points allowed per possession. So theoretically, if you don't have KJ, you want Shakeel Moore playing more minutes while he's out because he is one of your best defenders. Now, he played even more minutes than this in the Kansas State game when he had 31. I have it down at 26. But as we'll see once we get to the Shakeel Moore minutes, with KJ, those might go down a little bit there. The reason I do have Flory starting next to Hunter is I don't think it matters as much as who starts. Like, I have voiced the concern of, if you only have 2 healthy big men, right, when Zach Clements is out, if you only have 2 healthy big men, do you really want Flory Badunga starting out there and putting at risk the chance of Flory and Hunter, one of the 2, or both of them getting in foul trouble when you don't really have another option that you'd be able to go to? Like, honestly, what would happen if both were in foul trouble for the game? What would KU do at the 5? Would they play 5 guards with like AJ Storr being the 5? Would would you just throw one of the walk-ons out there? Would it be like Dylan Wilhite or Justin Cross or something? That's a question that you don't want to see, that you're actually a lot closer to seeing than you might certainly think. But I don't think it matters as much in terms of who's starting. If the minute, like, theoretically, if Flory plays 22 minutes off the bench versus starting and playing 22 minutes, It's the same. It's the same. It's just one start of the game. You know what I mean? Like, it's not that different. So I don't think it really matters in terms of who's starting. I think it matters more about the minutes. I haven't played 24. He played 25 in the Kansas State game, playing, some of those, 14 of them to be exact, at the 4, and then the other 10 as the backup 5 to Hunter Dickinson. If you wanted to lower those minutes in case of foul trouble, or maybe even raise Hunter's to 32 just to make sure of the foul trouble, I would actually understand both of those. Right now I have Hunter at 30 minutes. Then when we look at the 2-guard position, beyond Shakeel Moore starting, I have Zeke Mayo operating a good amount of minutes behind him. And then I just left some room open, 11 minutes to be exact, for spot minutes at the 2-guard position. But that doesn't necessarily mean the spot minutes have to come to somebody playing the 2. I'll explain that in a second. So the players I have playing the 3, Zeke Mayo starting, and then between Zeke Mayo's minutes as the 3 and as the 2, I have him playing 30 minutes per game, which is the same as Dajuan and Hunter for most in this scenario. I have Ryland Griffin being the main backup at the 3, getting a ton of minutes there. And then I have Ryland Griffin also getting 10 minutes as the backup 4, to where the combination of Ryland Griffin playing the 3 and 4 is 26 minutes. I think Ryland Griffin needs to play for this team. I think he really opens things up from a shooting perspective. And if you're going to be playing without KJ, yes, there are certain things you want to do to increase your defense without him, but if you're going to have to be more of an offensive team without KJ, steer into the offense, right? Give Ryland Griffin go and let him fly from 3. Then I have AJ Storr getting some minutes at the backup 3, but also getting a majority of his minutes as the backup 4 behind Flory. And again, if you want to start Storr over Flory or Griffin over Flory and go with that, it doesn't really matter as long as the minutes kind of work out the same. And I have Storr getting a few less minutes than Griffin because overall, I think, and I know Storr played more minutes than Griffin in the Kansas State game. I think that Griffin has, to me, he's shown more effort, and I've seen more positives on the defensive end of the floor, and I've seen less in terms of, sometimes there are times with AJ Storr where it's like, what was that shot? That was bad shot selection. I don't think Bill Self liked that. I see less of those lapses with Ryland Griffin. Plus, I like the 3-point shooting more with Griffin than AJ Storr. So that's why I've been playing more, even though that wasn't the case in the Kansas State game, that I just think, you have kind of more value there. So back to the spot minutes. What does that mean? Because we're left with basically a 7-man rotation here for KU, right? You have Dajuan, Shakeel Moore, Zeke Mayo, Flory Badunga, and Hunter Dickinson as your starting 5. You have Ryland Griffin and AJ Storr eating the backup minutes. Obviously, in this scenario, Zach Clements and KJ Adams are out. And then I have 11 minutes available for spot minutes. And I listed that at the 2 position, but you could easily shift that down to the 3 position. You could say, okay, I'll shift that down to the 3 position, and now the spot minutes are available at the 3 position, and now there's more minutes available at the 2, and Zeke Mayo just plays more at the 2 than he does at the 3. Or Ryland Griffin gets some minutes at the 2, and now there's some spot minutes available at the 3. And so basically where the spot minutes go is it's dependent. It could be dependent on the matchup, right? Are you playing a team who has a need for you to play an extra wing? Okay, spot minutes go to Rakese Passmore. Is Zach Clements back and healthy again? Okay, now you shift the spot minutes around, and now Zach Clements can play some of those spot minutes. Or is the spot minutes more necessary for you to play another guard, a ball handler, whether it's at the 1 or the 2? Then that would be where Diggy Coit comes in. So you can move the spot minutes around wherever you want, but they do factor in, and basically you view 11 spot minutes per game. That could basically be, David Coit plays 8 minutes this game, and Rakese Passmore gets 3. That could be one plays 6, one plays 5. That could be, David Coit was 3 for 3 from 3 in his first 6 minutes of play, so Bill Self played him 11 minutes for the game, right? So that's kind of how it works out. So I have it kind of factored down to really an 8-man rotation where the 8th man is kind of spot minutes, and that's been kind of a good zone for where Bill Self has lived, an area that I think Bill Self has certainly liked in his time at Kansas, and I think that one makes a lot of sense, and I think it would leave a lot of minutes for both Storr and Griffin to both try to make an impact on the game and to kind of hit the ground running for you moving forward. I don't think it would be overexerting anybody, right? In this scenario, nobody's playing more than 30 minutes, even though it is only really a 7.5-man rotation. I think that's a good place to be. And again, if you want to shift around and say, okay, Hunter's up to 32 and Flory's down to 22, or, you give another 1 or 2 to, I don't know, Zeke Mayo or Dajuan Harris and bump one off Shakeel Moore, that's totally fine. But I think this would work for KU in this current climate without KJ. What about when KJ does come back, though? Let's get to that minutes rotation, what I would go with on Locked On Jayhawks. Our episode of the show today is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. The FanDuel app is easy to navigate, and the variety of bets keeps every game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings. Whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add some extra excitement to the playoffs, FanDuel has you covered. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. Get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Basically, the Chiefs-Bills game is a pick 'em right now. Chiefs slight favorite, but basically a pick 'em. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL and the Locked On Podcast Network. All right, continuing on with this episode of Locked On Jayhawks, thank you to the everydayers catching each and every show. Thank you to you for listening, and don't forget to check out Locked On College Football for a recap of the national title game, Locked On College Basketball to really get you into college basketball season now, right? We're winding down on the NFL, college football season over, college basketball season now time, baby. Portal season kind of coming to an end too. Okay, what about when KJ returns? What to do with the rotation there if you are KU? So let's get into that. Here's our minutes rotation, what we would do when KJ does come back. Now, again, in the same vein of what we talked about in the first segment, I know some people will be like, well, why not just have KJ as a super sub coming off the bench, especially if this works? And I do think there is a certain reservation here for me in putting this together because there is a little bit of a guinea pig test over these next couple of games for KU, right? What if they do lose these next two games? What if you lose at TCU and Houston and you come out of this going, yeah, they are a way better team with KJ, right? Then it's a different equation, right? Versus what's the flip side, right? What if KU slaughters TCU on Wednesday and then they beat Houston at home on Saturday? And then you're like, actually, they might kind of be a better team. They might be a more open offense without KJ, right? Those are different scenarios where one, you're going, okay, we're going to reinsert KJ. Like KJ is going to play. We know that. But maybe one is closer to 20 minutes per game. Maybe the other is closer to 30 minutes per game, right? Like those things are a little bit dependent on how these results go over the next couple games for better or for worse. That said, I don't think it's as important, like I said earlier, as who starts. And if you want to continue to say, hey, KJ, you've worked your butt off and you know, all the faults that you want to blame on, it doesn't always work with KJ next to Hunter. I don't think you blame KJ for that. Like he tries as hard as possible. He hustles as hard as he does. Like he tries to do everything that Bill Self asks of him and more. If you want to blame anybody, I think you blame Bill Self for continuing to roll with that rotation as long as he does, right? So I don't blame KJ. He's the tool. Bill Self is the hammer, or he's the nail and Bill Self is the hammer. It's like don't blame the nail for going in the wall. Blame the hammer, the person swinging it, right? But nonetheless, if you want to give an ode to that and continue starting him, you can do that while still playing him less minutes than he is getting in a more limited role to where you're saying, hey, we still view you like you still are valuable. You're arguably the best defender on the team. That still has a value on the team. And we saw in the Kansas State game, they could have used an extra defender for that in certain situations. But also, maybe in other situations, you want more offense out there. So maybe there's a happy medium you can find after the K-State game. And that's what I'm kind of going for here in this minute rotation. So we have Dajuan Harris at 28 minutes per game, all minutes coming at the point guard position. Then we have Shakeel Moore playing those backup point guard minutes for 12 minutes per night. Now, in the other one, we had Shakeel Moore 26 minutes per game. I have Shakeel Moore, and I think the number here is wrong on this, so I'm going to go ahead and edit this right here in front of you if you're watching on YouTube. But I think this is supposed to be 22 minutes per game. He's playing 10 minutes per game at the 2 position, and he is playing 12 minutes per game at the 1 position. So 22 minutes per game. And I think the reason why is what I said earlier. The difference in minutes is, okay, with KJ, you have an extra good defender out there, right? But KU needs more offense when KJ's out there. So, those extra 4 minutes can go a long way for KU. Whereas with KJ Adams out, you need more defense is what you showed. You showed that you actually have a better offense, but you need more defense. And again, it's a 1-game sample size against a bad Kansas State defense, so we need to see more data, but just overreacting to that first game. That would kind of make some sense to me. Then you have Zeke Mayo continuing to start the 3. He picks up about 8-9 minutes per game at the wing position on the 3 when he's out there with the 2 point guard lineup of Dajuan and Shakeel Moore. And then he gets a big chunk of his minutes coming at the 2 position. Overall, he's playing 30 minutes per night if you're Zeke Mayo. I also left some spot minutes at the 2 position available for kind of the same reason. It's just there's less spot minutes available, right? With KJ adding another player who's taking minutes, that would leave just 8 spot minutes available at the 2. I continue to have Rylan Griffin playing really big minutes for KU in this one, not at quite 26 in the other one, but I do have 25. And you could say, okay, there's all these extra minutes for KJ Adams, but how are you going to get 25 if you're getting 26 without KJ Adams? Well, okay, to the same reason that, with KJ Adams, you need an extra floor space, or you need an extra shooter. And I think Ryland Griffin, along with Zeke Mayo, represent your two best options at playing on the floor when KJ is on the floor. If KJ is on the floor, Zeke or Ryland Griffin should be on the floor at all times. And if preferable, like both of them should be on the lineup at all times when KJ is out on the floor. So if KJ is not on the floor, Shakeel Moore and Dajuan Harris, great. If KJ is on the floor, Zeke Mayo, Ryland Griffin next to Dajuan Harris. Like, that makes a lot of sense. So we're playing Ryland Griffin 25 minutes per game. All of it coming at the 3, though. He doesn't have to play any minutes at the 4, which I think helps you on the defensive end and rebounding the basketball. Then we have a little bit of minutes for AJ Storr at the 3, as well as a good amount of minutes for AJ Storr at the 4. Overall, AJ Storr playing 19 minutes per game, down from like the 23 without KJ. That still allows AJ Storr to get a pretty sizable role off the bench and still try to establish himself that if he can get things clicking, you can still raise those minutes up to 25, or maybe even more than that minutes per game in this scenario, right? Then you have Flory playing, backup 5 minutes and backup 4 minutes, where he's getting 20 minutes a night. And I think that protects Flory in a way where he's playing 20 minutes, where that's a good amount of minutes to still make an impact, but it's also not overdoing it with minutes that you have to worry as much about foul trouble for Flory Badunga. Starting at the 4, I mentioned KJ Adams, but here's the big one for KJ. I have him playing just a little under a handful, to be honest, like 4 minutes per game at the backup 5, playing a little bit of minutes at the 4, and totaling 22 minutes per game, where KJ is now this super defender that can just exert all out energy when he's on the court. He can get a little minutes at the 5, where you can throw out this, I think what would be a really fun offensive lineup of KJ, who's a good passer and dunker at the 5 position. If you're surrounding him with, say, AJ Storr at the 4, Ryland Griffin at the 3, Zeke Mayo at the 2, and Dajuan Harris at the 1. Or you want to go Dajuan at the 1, Shakeel Moore at the 2, Zeke or Ryland at the 3, and then Ryland or Storr at the 4. You can be a switchable defensive lineup. You can space the floor, and KJ in that role is going, it's like, it doesn't matter if you sag the paint on him, because usually the center sags the paint, right? So I think that would be a lot of fun to just throw out there 4 or 5 minutes a game and see how the defense responds and just give them something else to think about. And that still gets KJ 22 minutes per game, but it's not as taxing of a load. And then we have Hunter Dickinson playing 26 minutes per game. And this would allow for Hunter to, I guess, be more rested, right? Because if you're looking at Hunter, we saw in the Kansas State game, just an awesome offensive performance. But what has been the big knock at times this season when people have been upset with Hunter's performances? It usually has centered around maybe the lack of effort or not being fast enough on the defensive end of the court. Well, if you're playing 26 minutes per game, maybe it's a little bit easier to kind of hustle through some of that stuff. So that's why we have all these minutes for this together. It totals out to being an 8-man rotation with a 9th spot for spot minutes, which we have seen in some other years. We go back down to our handy dandy chart of past rotation depth for KU. And, you look at past years, like I always like to point back to that 2011 season, for instance, when KU was, able to really play for, 5% plus of minutes, 9 guys as part of the rotation. Or if you look at games played, 8 guys, or if you look at 8+ minutes per game or 10+ minutes per game, 10 guys. And so it is possible that Bill Self wants to play like that. And, that would be my rotation for once KJ comes back. But again, it kind of all depends on how KU does these next couple games, because we're going to learn a lot about this team, about these players, how they all fit together, and what the best lineups and fits are, I think, in these next couple games, maybe more so than we have all season long to this point in time. Our episode of the show is brought to you by PrizePicks, where you can get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings, PrizePicks has changed the game in daily fantasy sports. Whether it's the playoffs or regular season, PrizePicks has made it easier than ever to win big while enjoying all of your football action. And now it's playoff time, right? So this is prime time to be able to do this. There's no better time to get in on the action right now. Simply pick more or less on at least 2 players, and if your picks hit, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. That's right, 1,000 times your money just by making a few simple picks. This week's on PrizePicks, you can get Josh Allen more passing yards. You can get Travis Kelce more receiving yards. I feel like Josh Allen always runs well against the Chiefs. So maybe the more on the rush yards for Josh Allen there. It's fun to predict, easy to play, and with PrizePicks Flex Play, you can still double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. And with the app, you get your winnings fast, sometimes in as little as 15 minutes. Ready to run your game this football season? Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 just for playing. Don't wait. Take your game to the next level with PrizePicks. PrizePicks, run your game. All right, continuing on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks, finishing up. What can we actually expect for the KU rotation? Because I think that's a very fair question. This is maybe stuff I would do, and maybe you would teeter with something here or there. If you want to knock off a couple minutes, this guy and throw it to that guy, totally understandable, right? I do still think the rotation is going to get shaved at some point in time. And maybe as much as anything, that's the importance of these next couple games, right? If you view it from that standpoint, if you say Bill Self eventually is going to shave this rotation, it's eventually going to be, once KJ comes back and gets, reintegrated into the lineup and the rotation, it's going to be down to an 8-man rotation at some point. Well, you look at it and you would say, okay, who's getting the cut, right? And maybe right now it'd be easy to say David Coit and Marquise Passmore, right? What if it goes further than that? What if it does become a 7-man rotation with an 8th man kind of getting spot minutes? Then it becomes very important between Ryland Griffin and AJ Storr, who kind of wins out on those minutes for KU. So that becomes super crucial. But also, this is the last stand for David Coit and Marquise Passmore in the time that KJ Adams is out, to be a part of that rotation, to get that last ticket to the airplane, so to speak, before it takes off, right? So that is certainly interesting. But it does kind of seem like non-negotiables for Bill Self of having Dajuan, KJ, and Hunter playing big minutes. So even though I had, when KJ is coming back, playing 22 minutes, how realistic, how feasible is that? I think Kansas would really have to show out these next however many games that KJ is out, right? Doesn't mean you have to win everyone, but you probably got to win. Well, it depends how many games you play, right? If you're without KJ for 6 games and you go 5-1, and the one loss to a good team, you beat some of these other good teams, that certainly speaks to a certain thing about it, versus if you go 3-3 without him, right? All that stuff kind of matters. But I also could see it being a situation where it's like Bill Self goes right back to KJ being a starter, playing 28 minutes a night or whatever it is. As soon as he comes back into the lineup, I almost wonder if it would take a KU does well in these games without KJ, and then the first game back with KJ, they struggle or they lose the game. That is part of what I wonder. But it's entirely possible. This has to be the audition. And to be clear, I'm not sold on the fact, I'm not guaranteeing, I have a KJ playing 22 minutes, but like I've said, I'm not guaranteeing or completely sold on the idea that KU is this better team or whatever. Again, Kansas State is a really bad defensive team right now. So the fact that you had your best offensive performance, that might just be because they're bad on the defensive end of the court, right? We're going to learn more from the TCU game, who's a good defense. We're going to learn even more from the Houston game, who is the best defense in the country and one of the best teams in the country, right? So I think it'll be very interesting to see how KU plays moving forward to kind of determine some of those things. But honestly, right now, if I was predicting what's going to happen to the rotation when KJ Adams does come back, if I was just saying what I think Bill Self's going to do, I would kind of assume that it's just going to be the same old, same old. And obviously the fact that AJ Storr and Ryland Griffin didn't have huge games against Kansas State probably doesn't influence or does influence that prediction right now for me a good amount as well. All right, that'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page. We'll be back with you for a Kansas TCU preview. See you tomorrow.